Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex Weprin. This is Michael Steele. I'm really excited to be here, in part because you are a creature of politics and the media. You're as a cable news contributor, as a podcaster, as a radio host, you kind of live in both these worlds here. So the last panel was really talking about television versus digital, and I think that's a topic we're going to certainly discuss this morning. But I wanted to first kind of get your thoughts on television in general. Because I know when we were talking last week, you had some strong opinions on it, and I was kind of hoping you can kind of elaborate a little bit on on how you approach television as a campaign.
Television, good. You know, we like television. It's all good. It's an interesting, it's a dynamic medium, obviously, that is undergoing a great deal of change. A lot of pressure from the digital world, the cable world. Traditional television. So I guess I kind of look at it from a campaign perspective or a political perspective. There are buckets, and the biggest bucket for 60 years has been the thing that we know as the box, TV. So NBC, ABC, CBS, right? The network channels, and a lot of politics cater to the evening news programs and advertising dollars focused on that. In many respects, that's still the case. You still have a great deal of advertising dollars that go into programming in and around the various popular programs in the evening, et cetera, so that people can see your message. But what changed and what has continued to change the process and create more opportunities and some challenges is the whole other boxes, the digital box, internet, et cetera, Facebook, things like that. And of course, cable news, where I get to play day in and day out, where you do have a bit more flexibility. It's not a fixed amount of time between 7 and 11, it's around the clock. So it really has changed the way campaigns and politicians kind of look at where they're going to put their money. I know when I ran for the U.S. Senate in 2006, we did a number of commercials. I don't know how many of you saw my puppy ad, which was kind of noted, and we put that in selected times in the morning. So moms and dads are getting their kids ready for school. The puppy ad would run, and the kids were like, "Ooh, the puppy!" And so you can strategically place where you want your advertising, but you were kind of locked in in the traditional model when you could do it. With the cable model and others, you find much more flexibility, and you can go around systems and pretty much put up whatever you want.
Yeah, it's still kind of a blunt instrument, though, isn't it? Like so if you're in a swing district in New Jersey, you have to buy in New York. If you're
yeah, and that's the pain in the butt is when you're looking at it from a dollar perspective, what you've got to raise. So if I'm a candidate running for, city council or the county council, and I want to run some ads on local TV, if I'm in this market, I got to pay the DC rate. I'm like, well, wait a minute, I'm running in Western Maryland or on the Eastern Shore or in parts of Virginia. And so that again really changes the behavior for a lot of campaigns where they try to find other ways to do it, other ways to get their message and their picture out there. And of course, where is that afforded is on digital, cable, and this new medium in terms of Facebook and things like that.
Sure. So how do you manage this kind of new media ecosystem where you have cable, you've got broadcast, you've got local, you've got social media, you've got digital news platforms, you've got more options than ever if you're running a campaign. How do you figure out where to allocate your budget, where to spend your money?
Well, that's always a fight because your comms people want to spend as much as they can to get the message out there. The political director wants the money on the ground. Out in communities and neighborhoods, so they figured the best voice is the candidate standing at a subway stop as opposed to running a 30-second ad. So you have these internal battles, and you try to find the best way to split the political baby, if you will, or the communications baby, so that you get enough juice from one that it feeds the other. So if I'm doing, enough TV work when I go to the subway stops, when I go to the malls, I get some benefit from that because people will have seen the ad. Similarly, going out and meeting the public and shaking hands and saying hello, when I run that ad, it has a bigger impact. And the this going this way, where you do the public stuff and then play on the media side, the strategy there is a little bit more interesting because I'm less committed to spending those dollars on network television because I've been out in the public, so now I'm going to go where the public plays. And where's the public play? Well, if you're of a certain age group, you play on Facebook. If you're another age group, you play on Twitter. If you're another age group, you do this or that. So I can then pick and choose. I'm less beholden when I spend time on the street and then want to go and sort of connect the public to my campaign. I've got a little bit more flexibility. Whereas the other way, if you start out on the TV side, first off, you spent a lot of money, so there's that. And then secondly, you're not sure everybody is seeing that ad. And that's the biggest problem. What is the number of looks that you get from that versus the number of looks you get when you send it in an email and they can pop it up on YouTube and boom.
So is there a return on investment factor here? Are there certain places where you can still get really good bang for your buck? Certainly television is incredibly expensive, but it's also incredibly wide-reaching. So where's the best ROI?
Yeah, well, the thing about, and that's, I think, it depends on the campaign, really. I know for some campaigns, they focus a lot less on the network side, the more traditional approaches where they go and they do the TV thing, and they do much more social media. So you look at the candidates who have come into Congress, you look at how they got there and what they did and what they are doing. And when you look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Facebook Living, when you look at other candidates, Beto O'Rourke and others who kind of, I'm sitting in a dentist chair and I've got, the camera and the phone and you're watching me get my teeth cleaned. Okay, this is exciting because, well, it's exciting from the standpoint that you're reaching a lot of people in an unconventional way, in an unconventional setting. You just can't do that on TV. You're not going to bring a film crew into your dentist office and set up the camera shot and get the right angle, you're back there like that, and then put that on TV at 7:30 at night. You're just not. So the return on investment is much better from the digital space and than you will find in the more traditional spaces because you have control, you have flexibility, and your cost, which is the real ROI you're looking for, is minimal in terms of what you're going to get back. I mean, the return on investment is through the roof when you look at the number of people who watch that Facebook, who then went back and watched it on YouTube or whatever. So you realize the repetitive nature of it is there, as well as the immediate benefit.
So you kind of mentioned social media there, and that's something I think that is certainly campaigns have been dealing with Facebook and social media for years, but and the politicians themselves are they take it naturally, that use it in a way that feels organic to them. How do you kind of approach that now? We have this, you mentioned Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Certainly, President Trump is an avid Twitter user.
Oh yeah, no.
So how do you, if you're a campaign, if you're a politician, how do you kind of approach that now that you can kind of use those platforms to
some of it, I guess, has to do with your mindset. If you are of a mind, or maybe even a certain age, where that's still kind of foreign to you, you're going to be less inclined to want to do it. I've worked with candidates who are like, I really don't want to do that, and they're much happier just printing a flyer and putting it on somebody's door, and then doing one commercial with their kids in the background and putting that up on the local television and calling it a campaign. Whereas others are going to be, and I think the future is now in this respect, and I think a lot of these folks know this, where the aggressive push into this new digital space is comprehensive. It covers everything. It's not just placing an ad on a website. It is all of that and then some. And the beauty and the upside of it is the creativity, where you find space to do something that's a little less conventional, even in an unconventional environment. And I know for me, I've always found campaigning to be something where it's all about first impressions. So if the goal is to really land with the voter, if I really want you to know me and maybe even like me, then I can find various ways to figure out. Now, what a lot of campaigns do when you couple into this media piece is knowing who the voter is. So a lot of the work before you even put that ad out there is done in identifying what you like, and tailoring my message, tailoring my connection to you to that space. So you take a lot of the consumer data that's out there on the streets now. The Republican Party back in the 1990s developed expertise in micro-targeting, in which we decided, okay, let's figure out exactly what this young lady here is all about. We know she may be a Democrat or Republican. We know she votes and how many times she's voted, where she's voted. We know where she lives. We know, she goes to church on Sunday or she doesn't. So we have some basic general information that we can gather about you. Now, with all of the things that you've done in your network, you shop over there, you like to eat this kind of pizza, you go to these types of rallies, that kind of consumer data is now folded into the political space, which is the incredibly interesting new dynamic in politics and media. Is all of this information is now being hunkered down in one space, and now I can target you to the point where, okay, so you are a pro-life, environmentalist who is, likes some form of gun control, and the gentleman sitting next to you is pro-choice, not so crazy about the environment, et cetera. And so you can now. I can tailor my messaging. So where the challenge and the trick comes is when I take that messaging, right, that I'm directing to you through content that you get on your phone, mailers that show up at your door, how do you then take all of that and develop a message that they're both looking at the same time and don't feel isolated from the candidate or the message? And that's the new trick in the new space, and some are more successful than others in doing that.
So I feel like data is like the most important topic when you think about
absolutely.
The future of political advertising. Certainly, how much more data do we have today that we had even 10 years ago, thanks to smartphones, right? Which can track locations. So how do you manage all that data? Certainly it seems like there's so much. How do you kind of make sense of it?
Well, we have to ask the Russians about that because they seem to have a clue. That's the real challenge, is how do you manage all that data? You have these bodies that once were not responsible for this information suddenly collecting it and storing it and housing it. And the security around that, the use of that, the privacy issues that are involved in that, we've just really begun to really tap into what all that may mean. How it impacts dollars in the industry, how it impacts not just the dollars that you raise, but the dollars I want to spend, how it impacts how I access that information. One of the frustrating parts for some of the parties now is that the political organs, the RNC and the DNC, collect all this information, and they're selling it back to the parties. And the parties are like, wait a minute, you're selling us information on our own people. So you have that dynamic. So there are a lot of new doors that are being opened in this space because of how quickly it's expanding, the ease with which you can access it, the ease with which you can manipulate it. And there are some real positives, obviously, but there's some real problems as well. And I think that that's still going to be worked out over time, just as we did with back in the day in the 1990s when micro-targeting came on. Everybody was like, oh my God, how dare you invade this young woman's privacy? Well, given the kind of information we were getting, it was all public record stuff, right? It was all, you can go and to the Board of Elections, or you could go, to a government agency that was sort of warehousing some of this data and get it. Now, with the level of consumer information that's out there, it's not necessarily public information that you like pizza with some weird toppings, So, but now I know that, and so I'm going to send you an ad that shows pizza with weird toppings, or I'm going to send you if I'm a consumer, a company that's selling pizza, or I'm going to send you a flyer that says, people who like weird pizza should be protected. So,
yeah. Do you think that there's a risk of kind of that data being pulled back a bit as consumers become more aware of what's out there? Because certainly most people might not think about the fact that their credit card transactions can be tied to their location data, can be tied to their likes on Facebook to create a profile. So, there's been talks in Washington about privacy regulations, but that would certainly seem to impact political campaigns as well.
Oh, it's absolutely right. And in that, I think as consumers become more sensitive to exactly how exposed they are in this new space, it's going to have an impact because they're going to want some level of control to protect their degree, some degree of their privacy. I was talking with someone who this was a couple of campaigns ago, and this just tells you how far we've advanced. This was maybe now 4 years ago, and they were commenting on the fact that they had signed up to contribute to a campaign. And they had, I guess, checked the box, send me information, et cetera, which you typically do. But then in addition to that, all of a sudden they started getting not just conversations, notifications from the campaign, but they started getting certain types of ads on their desktop, and I was like, well, when you stepped into that campaign, there are a whole universe of people who were there long before you got there, who kind of collect that information. So they looked at your location, they looked at, other consumer information about you, and they started advertising to you. And they were really bothered by that. It was like, I just went onto the campaign site and I just, wanted to volunteer and donate some money. I didn't expect all this other level of intrusion into my private space. So that's where the consumers will, I think, draw the line in how that information about them comes back to them. So now I know you know more about me than I thought you should know, or you should, should have.
So looking back at the 2018 campaign, it seemed like a lot of the Democratic messaging was around healthcare. And we're talking last week, you said it kind of felt like a grassroots, local type thing, driven there. So how do you, thinking ahead to 2020, how should campaigns approach kind of issues that are bubbling up at a local level versus more of a top-down approach from the party or the
well, that's always a challenge. You hear people talking about, we're going to nationalize the race, so I'm running for dog catcher, and all of a sudden I'm talking about, what's going on at the, Natural Reserve or, the World Bank or something. I was like, I'm just running for dog catcher. The fact of the matter is, in the political space, there are these tensions that build up around issues and around candidates and states. I mean, it just depends on the dynamic. And they have a way of shaping how you talk about your race, how you talk about issues. I remember when I ran for Comptroller of Maryland back in 1998, my first statewide race. And so I go to a debate, and I'm running for Comptroller. We all know what a Comptroller is, right? And we know what a comptroller does. A comptroller is the money guy. They are responsible for collecting taxes and et cetera, right? I'm at this debate, and of course, this was, Republicans had won the House, lost the House. There was a lot of tensions with the Clinton administration, and it was all this, Democratic versus Republican stuff. So I'm at this debate, and the first question out of the box is, why are you pro-life? And so I was like, well, unless the fetus pays taxes, I don't really think this is a relevant question for me to answer. And the point was, I'm running for an office that is specific to collecting the taxes in the state, managing the fiscal health of the state with the governor, et cetera. We will never encounter a question on abortion or pro-life as comptroller of Maryland. But what it said was that issue was roiling at the federal level. It was roiling nationally. And so it bled into what ostensibly is a, quote, local campaign, a statewide race. What I saw in 2018 was something very different, which I thought was expertly executed by Democrats. And that was, they didn't nationalize any of their races. They kept it very local. And it started long before the 2018 elections. If you go back to in 2017, you look at some of the special elections, and again, some of the local elections in Virginia, those states that are off year, Virginia, New Jersey, are off year elections, so they tend to come a year before the main congressional or presidential election years. You saw candidates winning by running on very local issues. And while I specifically remember the case, the race in Virginia, where the Democratic candidate was a transgendered individual. The Republican candidate was a very hard-nosed, hard-right conservative, had been the elected representative in that district for, since God wore, diapers, and had been there forever. He ran his campaign on national issues related to the LGBTQ community. So he was talking about all this family stuff and running against, this individual's sexuality and how that was a threat to the community and all this other stuff. She ran on putting stoplights at the appropriate intersections and making sure traffic patterns actually did not create congestion. Who won? The person talking about stoplights in a very conservative district. Why? Because she spoke to the issues that were more important to those people. They really didn't give a rat's ass about her sexuality. What they wanted to know is, can you get a stoplight at this corner? Because I'm tired of having accidents here. And that worked. And the Democrats did that across the board. And so healthcare became one of those issues, even though it had a national umbrella. Every candidate had a way of personalizing it and relating it more directly to their community. And what was important was the national party stayed out of the way. Tom Perez stayed out of the way and said, y'all do you, and we'll let you do you, and we're not going to interfere with that. We're not going to come down with a top-down heavy message. So if you want to run ads on that, if you want to put out flyers on a particular issue, this congressional candidate could be talking about health care. This other one could be talking about immigration. The other one over here could be talking about putting up stoplights.
Yeah. So, as someone who is a regular on cable news, you've got a podcast. How do you kind of think about these different parts of the media in terms of places you go to talk about policy versus places you go to kind of really, reach your base versus places you go to kind of have kind of a soundbite that might kind of resonate?
What do you mean?
So like a podcast sort of thing. It might be long form, you might have a long interview, you might have a long
Oh,
conversation.
yeah.
Cable news, generally, the interviews tend to be short, a lot of debate. How do you kind of, think about that?
I'll tell you, the podcast space is, and you guys know, it's exploded. Everyone's doing one or looking to do one. And the reason is a couple of reasons. One is freedom. You can talk about a range of topics and have a lot of fun with it. The other is convenience. You can do it at a time and space that works for you and your guest, and you can have a lot of fun that way. The TV setup is great. It's great, but it's also limiting. I mean, so if I'm on Hardball and if I'm on Morning Joe, and Morning Joe's a little bit different because you've got a 3-hour span and you've got a little bit more time to play, ostensibly, but really your life is boiled down to like 6-minute segments. So in that 6-minute segment, we're really looking around at you realize that on these topics that's pretty something that's you really got your teeth into, you want to talk about, you can be somewhat limited in actually putting that out there and having time to do the follow-up and actually, give a substantive answer and sort of work it through. The podcast form, you can do that. I love my podcast. You get a chance to check it out. Man of Steel, it's a lot of fun. It's crazy because what I wanted to do was something that was not traditional or conventional. I want to be able to come in as I tell, and this is interesting. So I tell my guests, I said, look, the idea is I'm not going to ask you questions. I just don't want to get in this, okay, so today we've got, Joe, and Joe's going to be asked a lot of questions. He's going to answer them. That's boring. So I said, well, look, let's have a conversation. Let's pretend that we're at a table in a restaurant and we're just sitting there having some drinks and it's kind of cool and we're just talking about stuff, right? And I'll throw some topics out. You can kind of, wax poetic. You got something you want to talk about, wax poetic on that. And then we'll have fun. What is interesting is it tells you how trained people are. So you start the conversation and there's this pause because they're waiting for you to ask them a question. And I'm like, no, just talk. Let's go with it. And it just tells you how we just kind of get set into this kind of rote kind of behavior. Okay, I'm the interviewee. You're going to interview me. Ask me a question. I will answer it. So what I love about this medium is it's just the free form flow of it. You can get in there. You can push the envelope. You can have some fun with it. My podcast, we throw in a little bit of club music underneath the conversation, And what's interesting about that is that people were like, this is a great podcast, but can you kill the music? So I was like, So I told my producer, keep the music in next week. Oh, dude, it's really good, but, what's up with the music? So the music, I said, well, turn the music down as low as you can, right? So we turned it down as low as you can. Still, and what it's teaching me is how people listen. Because if they were in an environment at a club or a restaurant and there was background music, it wouldn't bother them. But when you put them in a setting more traditional, like a podcast or what they think is a conventional set with how they, it's just all I want to hear is the voice. The brain doesn't kind of compute it for them, so they get all discombobulated because there's music. I leave the music in because the music is cool, and I think it adds to the conversation. And slowly but surely, the audience is coming along to saying where the music doesn't bother them. They actually think it's kind of cool, and that's the process. And that's, in politics, that's all about how you train your voter. In television, how you train your viewer to come around to a perspective that may be somewhat outside of what they're used to doing, or is not conventional, and eventually they come back into that space a little bit more comfortably. So I love that with that medium. It's great.
Great. So I think we're going to take maybe 1 or 2 questions.
Sure.
You have questions of Michael? Actually, I wanted to follow up on your podcast point,
Sure.
Michael, because one of the slams against podcasting is that it tends to sit within the bubble. We tend to self-select podcasts that are reinforcing our held views. Do you find that you're reaching a new audience and you're reaching beyond maybe what would be considered a natural audience for a former RNC chair?
Yeah, that's a good point, and it is somewhat. We do gravitate to spaces that we're most comfortable with. So if you and I agree on a lot of stuff, then we're just going to be in that space. We're going to love it. And he comes in and messes the whole thing up. We're like, no, stay away. What I try to do, and a lot of it's driven by who you have on the show, and so I try to get Democrats to come on and talk, as well as Republicans. So it's not this; it's much more of a balance in terms of who's there. So we'll get. We had Congressman Swalwell on recently, and we're trying to get some really progressive liberal types so I can really pull my hair out, and I've done a good job of that already. But the goal is to really try to mix up the conversation, because you're right, people kind of fall into a space where if they perceive you to be a certain way, they perceive everything you do to be that way. But when you come out and you say, I love one of my favorite things, people come up to me and they go say, I like you so much better now than when you were RNC chairman. Well, I don't have the title, and it's amazing how titles play a role in what people think about you. I can go back and show you things that I said when I was RNC chairman that really pissed off a lot of Republicans. I'm still saying today, but they sound differently because I don't have the title. And so that's one of the ways I think you can sort of break up that sort of mindset about your podcast, is to mix up the kind of people you have coming on. Be a little bit less conventional in it, and even stretch your own limitations and press yourself to be a little bit outside the box, because at some point when you get where everybody's so comfortable, where they're just sitting there nodding to you when they're listening to you, then you're not really being effective anymore.
All right. Any questions over there?
Yeah. So Joe Mendes from MediaPost.
Hey, Joe.
Voters have always been so much skeptical, but do you think because of all the shenanigans that have happened over the last couple of years that they've become cynical? And are they tuning out? Does advertising messaging even mean anything anymore?
That's a good question. I think voters they've gone from skeptical to cynical to concerned. And I think I don't know if advertising will play a role in alleviating that concern or exacerbating it. In other words, it'll be interesting to see how Donald Trump does advertising in 2020, given that he did so little of it in 2016. It's amazing. That campaign is a case study on so many levels in terms of how he used media to get the kind of free advertising that he was able to get. Now, a lot of that was the media's fascination with this gadfly out of New York, so he was good for ratings. That I think created a lot of cynicism and skepticism for a lot of viewers out there. Now it's more concern. They're concerned. I hear it. They're concerned about what this space is going to be like in the next year. And I think you're going to see voters much more engaged and much more opinionated about it. It'll be interesting to see the kind of campaign ads that the Democrats run. Certainly Trump has given them a lot to work with, but how you use that, particularly with a voting population that is, you have a certain number, 38% or whatever, is so hardcore still on Trump, how in certain regions of the country the Democrats need to do well, how they message that and use that medium to sort of create, like I said at the beginning, a space where two very different voters walk away from seeing that commercial with the same good impression about that candidate or that message. But I think they'll be busy trying to figure that out, because the voters right now are not showing much interest in that particular side of the medium in terms of commercial, because they're really locked in other things right now.
Well, should they be taking a lesson from your earlier point about how much local issues were driving a lot of these campaigns? Is that a sign that the partisanship is more of a focus in D.C. than really out there in the rest of the country, and that people want a more local and relevant politics.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it does to some extent speak to how the media and campaigns can be their own worst enemies in terms of how they put together and message to voters. The partisanship question is an underlying question, I think, for a lot of people out there who are fed up. They're just sick and tired of the whole thing. So it was very refreshing for them to see candidates come in and talk about these issues in a very sort of normal way. And so when you have someone who tries to take, like the Virginia race, tries to take something and to be so partisan about it, you know, talking about some personal business of an individual or whatever, voters have now shown a tendency to walk away from that. And I think that's sort of also a reaction to Trump and how he's personalized politics in such a way that a lot of voters now seem to be turned off by that. Now, presidential campaigns, once they get started, as we all know, become self-fulfilling nightmares. And the reality of it is, once voters get back in the game and in the mix and the campaigns get ramped up and the stuff starts coming fast and furious, how they respond will mean a lot. But here's the element that no one can really factor into, and that's Robert Mueller. And what Robert Mueller does on campaign messaging in 2020, and whether or not his decisions and actions actually has the opposite effect of, maybe even the direct effect of nationalizing races that candidates actually would like to keep a little bit more local, because everybody's going to know, particularly if you're running for a statewide office like governor, or you're running certainly for federal office. So what do you think of the Mueller thing, and how does this play out, et cetera, et cetera. So that'll be interesting. It's almost like, again, my comptroller's race, where, you know, this national issue just kind of drops into the middle of your campaign. It's like, dude, I'm running for dog catcher. Why am I talking about Robert Mueller? But
well, thank you for ending us on a note on opening a huge can of worms.
Yeah.